Well, good afternoon. I'm Congressman John Micah. I'm pleased to chair one of the Oversight and Reform Subcommittees, which is Government Operations, and have the opportunity to be here today. The Democrat leader of the subcommittee is a distinguished gentleman and congressman from this district. I believe we're in his district, Mr. Connolly. So with that partnership, we have the responsibility to conduct various oversight hearings and look at government operations. But today I call and convene the subcommittee hearing to order in this district. And the title of today's hearing is Data Centers and the Cloud. Is the government optimizing new information technology opportunities to save taxpayer dollars? And that's the subject. And we're here actually at the request of the ranking member, Mr. Connolly. What we try to do is operate the panel in a bipartisan manner, and areas of interest or particular expertise, we like to highlight the priorities of members, and Mr. Connolly has been very active and a leader in trying to consolidate some of the duplicative and costly data centers in the federal government. He's been on this issue before I got the opportunity to chair this subcommittee, so has a long history in it. And it was one of his priority requests that we conduct the hearing, and jointly we decided that this would be a great place, Fairfax County, George Mason University, to have a field hearing here. I apologize for the delay. My plane was on time, but as I told Mr. Connolly, the traffic in Northern Virginia is horrendous, and in spite of my efforts to help with the rail connection to Dulles and all, we still have a ways to go. But we are delighted to be here. The order of business, I'll step out of order in just a second because we are here at a very distinguished university. If I could, and maybe I could ask the ranking member to introduce the president of this university, and we could inject a few comments before we get to the business of the subcommittee. Again, we are delighted to be here. I think it's great to come to a university setting. I don't know if we have students, professors, or others here, but it's an awesome opportunity. I see some of this may, in fact, be recorded, and again, it is an actual hearing of Congress and part of our real-time work. So we're pleased to be here. Would you do us the honors, Mr. Connolly?
I would. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much for being here. And we all apologize for our traffic, but when you were both the ranking member and the chairman of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, you were very sympathetic and supportive of our efforts to extend rail to Dulles Airport, and we want to thank you for your support, because you did get it about how serious the congestion is here. It's my privilege to introduce the president of George Mason University, Angel Cabrera. We just actually celebrated the installation ceremony for our new president. He comes to us after many years of serving in the southwest part of the United States in other academic endeavors, and we're delighted to have him here. George Mason University is about a little over 40 years old now, and in that 40-year time period has grown to become the largest single university in the Commonwealth of Virginia, which always surprises people at UVA, Mr. Jefferson's University that is over 200 years old, and Virginia Tech, also a very large campus. It just tells you a lot about what's going on in terms of academic permanence here in Northern Virginia. And it's a center of excellence, especially for the technology community, but for so many other things as well. So welcome, President Cabrera.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You might come over. I don't know, are these live here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Well,
Yield
thank
to
you so much, Chairman Micah and Congressman Connolly, for moving the business of Congress across the river, and I hope the air of Fairfax will make the meeting very, very productive. I want to point out that even though we have a problem with physical transportation of vehicles, the transportation of bits through the internet couldn't be any faster than it is in Northern Virginia, which I think is one of the reasons why this is a perfect location to have this discussion. I will also point out that we are, of course, in one of the most educated and one of the wealthiest counties in America. Those two things go hand in hand. And one of the reasons why this area has become probably the world's hotbed for the internet and for cloud computing and other information technologies is precisely because we have universities like George Mason that right now ranks in the top 200 of research universities in the world. So it's a privilege to have you here. I wish you a very productive meeting. Thank you so much for having chosen George Mason University to conduct your business. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Much appreciated.
Well, thank you, and again, we are pleased to be here, and we'll proceed. We are a little bit late in beginning the proceedings, but the order of business will be as follows. I'll start with an opening statement. I'll yield to Mr. Conley. Then we have two panels of witnesses. I'll introduce the two panels. One is primarily government. The second looks like primarily private sector. We will proceed with questions after we've heard from the witnesses, the full witness, first two on the first panel, and then the second panel. So with that, we will go ahead and proceed, and I'll recognize myself to sort of set the stage and talk about the topic. Today's hearing actually, again, is a result of some of the work of the Democrat leader of the committee. Several years ago, the GAO began some work and looked at some of the data center consolidations. In fact, today, and coinciding with this hearing, there's the release of this report, Data Center Consolidation, Strength and Oversight Needed to Achieve Cost Savings Goals. And the subject matter contained in this report will be discussed by the GAO representative. But some of the background here is that GAO reports, in fact, that in fiscal year 2011, the government funded 622 separate human resources systems costing $2.4 billion, some 580 financial management systems costing some $2.7 billion, 777 supply chain management systems costing some $3.3 billion, and so the list continues. Most of these systems perform unbelievably the same function. To address some of this wasteful duplication, and with much fanfare, the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, rolled out a program in 2010 entitled the Federal Data Center Consolidation Initiative. Sometimes you hear me refer to it as the FDCCI, but they trumped the fact that they thought that they could close 40% of the data centers by 2015 and save taxpayers a welcome $3 billion. That would have meant that in closing 1,253 of the 3,133 total federal database centers, we could save that much money. To accomplish the savings, 24 of the CFO Act agencies were tasked by the OMB to do several things. First of all, to conduct an initial inventory of data center assets by April 30th of 2010, and then secondly, to develop a plan by June 30th, 2010, and report quarterly on their closures and savings via an online portal called data.gov. Today, GAO has released the latest of its three reports, the one I referred to. In that report, we'll find that GAO uncovered the fact that the program was not being effectively implemented, unfortunately, and also unfortunately the taxpayers are not going to recognize or realize the projected savings that were anticipated. Specifically, OMB and the agencies, some of the findings, again, not mine, but theirs, were that the agencies were delinquent on finalizing their data consolidation, their migration plans, and also we have, I think, a chart up here that shows the cells in orange, and we see missing data in these cells, lots of question marks. So we also found in the report that we lacked a basic system to track cost savings so that progress towards that $300 billion cost savings goal could be measured. GAO states, and let me quote them, as of November 2012, the total savings to date had not been tracked, but were believed to be, unfortunately, minimal. Again, their commentary. OMB recently announced its plan to roll up the FDCCI into its broader, a new process called Portfolio Stat, potentially losing focus and motivation to carry out this much behind consolidation of the original intended government data centers, again, consolidation. At a time of fiscal austerity and tight budgets, it's never been more important for the federal government to drive efficiencies and cost savings through effective management of its information technology systems. It is absolutely essential that IT assets should be optimized to maximize the return on investments, reduce operational risks, and provide responsive services to its citizens. We must, I believe, accelerate data center optimization by urging agencies to complete meaningful transition and consolidation plans for their data centers and also accurately track these savings. And another thing that we're going to have to do is support broader transition to the cloud solutions for federal IT resources and hopefully drive broader efficiencies in the use and deployment of IT data centers. We're going to hear from some of the private sector and hear a little bit about how we might achieve some of that in our second panel. So with that sort of setting the stage for where we are in this hearing and again the review of what's taking place with this consolidation effort, let me now yield to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Conley.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your gracious willingness to have this field hearing here in the 11th District, Virginia, George Mason University. I have very much appreciated the spirit in which you and I have been able to work since the beginning of this year when this subcommittee was first formed, and my hat's off to you in terms of bipartisan cooperation and comedy, and I thank you. We have something like 3,100 data centers in the federal government. And that is an astounding number. It's a stovepipe kind of operation, and it is expensive and inefficient. And what we're trying to do here is identify ways to optimize, the purpose here through private sector cloud computing, through some remaining federal data centers that may make sense, but to try to achieve efficiencies, especially right now when we're in budget contraction. It is imperative to be able to, for agencies to be able to expand their scope and to be able to try to replace through better deployment of technology lost dollars in their bottom line in terms of their budget. If we don't do that, if we're not seized with a sense of urgency about that mission, then federal agencies are going to have to do less with less, and that will not serve the American people very well. And so this, while Passama Dry topic, is really at the cutting edge of can we organize ourselves in the federal government to replicate what the private sector has done in terms of the utilization of technology, better investments in technology, smarter investments in technology. We've had hearings, as the chairman knows, on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, where it is estimated that of the $81 billion a year federal information technology budget, perhaps as much as $20 billion of it is spent in less than optimum ways. Some of it maintaining very old legacy systems. Now, the good news about that, as was pointed out at one of our hearings, was that the Chinese don't know how to hack into those legacy systems. So maybe that's an upside. But in terms of efficiency for the future and making sure that we're ready to go for the future, I'm not sure it's the kind of investment we want to be maintaining forever. And so data center consolidation is one piece of a larger piece of federal IT policy. And as the chairman indicated, I requested the GAO report. We're going to hear about it today in testimony from Mr. Pounder on how we doing. And you can see from this chart, as the chairman just pointed out, well, I wouldn't give us an A in terms of compliance with trying to consolidate and eliminate duplicative data centers. For some agencies, it may just be that it's not a priority. For others, maybe they don't share the goal. But we have got to reach the OMB goal of 40% reduction or consolidation. And we want to actually go way beyond that, because that still leaves 1,100 or 1,200 data centers. And it's not at all clear that we need all of them. So this is an important part of a larger picture. This bill that I introduced on data center consolidation is an entire title of what's known as the FITAR bill that Chairman Issa, Chairman Micah, myself, and Ranking Member Elijah Cummings have introduced in this Congress. That would be the most comprehensive rewrite of federal IT acquisition policy since, in 20 years. And so this is a vital piece of it, and that's what we're doing here today to try to really focus on how can we do better at the federal level. We need to do better. So thank you all for being here, and again, Mr. Micah, thank you so much for having this hearing.
Again, pleased to be here, and what we'll do is we have additional statements that members may like to submit, and also if the public or anyone else is interested in submitting, it has to be done through a member. So in this case, it would be Mr. Conley or another member of our subcommittee panel. But without objection, the record will be left open for 7 days with Mr. Conley's concurrence, and also see that Facebook has written a written statement that they would like to be entered into the record. Mr. Conley asks that be permitted without objection, so ordered. Now we'll turn to our first panel of witnesses, and we have two distinguished panelists. Mr. David A. Pounder, and he is the Director of Information Technology Management Issues with the U.S. Government Accountability Office. We refer to it commonly as GAO. Then we have Mr. Bernard Mazer, and he is the Chief Information Officer of the Department of Interior. Now we have I think we've got two more witness little plaques out there. And I'm not a happy camper, Mr. Conley, that OMB and GSA have chosen not to provide us a witness this morning. And they are not going to squirm out of appearing before the panel. So we will schedule another hearing. It may not be here, but it'll be in Washington, and we will call them in either voluntarily or however we have to do it, because we do. This is about saving taxpayers significant sums of money and achieving something that they set out to do. So we need answers, and we want it straight from those individuals involved.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
Just,
Mr. Cowell.
I concur in your sense of disappointment with OMB. I conveyed my disappointment both to the White House directly and to OMB directly at their non-participation today. None of that should, of course, detract from the fact that we're delighted to have the witnesses we do have.
Yes, and we'll start it here in Fairfax at George Mason, and we'll get to the bottom of it. Sometimes it takes more time. I understand last night, apparently in response to this hearing, and these hearings do actually make things happen, believe it or not. GSA, which is a no-show, updated their data posting from 0 to 74 planned data center closings on data.gov. So we sometimes can get some things moving along, and that's part of this process, is the constant oversight that we're responsible for in this important committee and subcommittee. So those are the two witnesses we have from GAO and the Department of Interior. This is an investigative panel, and it is part of the procedures of the panel to swear in our witnesses. So I'd ask you to stand if you can, Mr. Powner, Mr. Mazur. Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give and provide this subcommittee of Congress is the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Let the record reflect that the witnesses answered and responded in the affirmative. So with that, the way we proceed for everyone's information is, well, first I'll call on GAO's representative, Mr. Powner, and then Mr. Mazur in that order. And we have a little bit of extra time. We try to hold it to 5 minutes. If you have prepared information or background data you'd like submitted to the record, just a request to the chair, and that will be accomplished. So with that, we welcome you. And Mr. Powner, first, you're recognized.
Chairman Micah, Ranking Member Connolly, we appreciate the opportunity to testify on the federal government's efforts to consolidate its data centers and to save taxpayers billions of dollars. At a time when we hear too often about fraud, waste, and duplicative federal programs, the Data Center Consolidation Initiative is an effort that is good government. Its goals are to reduce costs, increase current low server utilization rates, and shift to more efficient computer platforms and technologies. The specific goals are very clear and aggressive. Close 40% of the government's over 3,000 data centers and save the taxpayer $3 billion. This afternoon we are releasing our third report on this initiative. The first two highlighted holes in agencies' inventories and plans and made recommendations to ensure that inventories were complete and that agency plans clearly had comprehensive schedules to close centers and associated cost savings. For example, last summer we reported that only 3 agencies had complete inventories: SSA, HUD, and the National Science Foundation. And only 1 agency had a completed plan, that being the Department of Commerce. While incomplete, these plans still showed great opportunities for cost savings. For example, DoD claimed that it could save $2.2 billion. In its recent budget submission, DoD plans to save $575 million in fiscal year 14 alone. And I think that's represented on your chart up there in FY14. This afternoon I will provide a progress report on closure and cost-saving goals and recommendations to ensure progress continues. My comments will also address the importance of FTAR in this area. Data center closures to date and those planned are promising. 400 centers were closed by the end of December, and another 400 are planned to be closed by September of this year, as your chart shows up there. And the plan is to close well over 1,000 centers by December 2015. Despite impressive progress and visibility into the closure situation, this is not the case regarding progress and transparency towards the cost savings goal of $3 billion. In fact, OMB is not tracking cost savings. This lack of such data raises questions about the government's ability to meet its overall goal. But let's be very clear on the cost savings issue. Closing over 800 centers should yield significant cost savings. The Department of Agriculture recently reported to the Appropriations Committee that it saved nearly $50 million in FY13. DHS is reporting $20 million of savings in FY13, and we've already discussed DoD's plans to save $575 million in FY14. Now is not the time to take our foot off the accelerator regarding associated cost savings, and FTAR would be extremely helpful since it requires the tracking and reporting cost savings. OMB has recently integrated the data center effort with its broader portfolio stat initiative, and is in the process of revamping metrics in this area. OMB stated that its new goal is to close 40% of the non-core data centers, and that additional metrics in areas like energy consumption are to be developed by the Data Center Task Force. Folding the data center effort under this initiative is fine, as long as the right metrics are in place, including cost savings, and that it provides the appropriate level of transparency. Mr. Chairman, having the right metrics and transparency moving forward is currently a big question mark. Our recommendations are to track and annually report on key data center metrics, including cost savings to date, extend the time frame for achieving cost savings beyond the current 2015 horizon, because significant savings will occur beyond that date given where agencies are at today. Regarding governance, we need better leadership out of OMB and the GSA program office if we expect the data center initiative to be successful. With OMB, this leadership starts with the federal CIO. In addition, each CIO needs this to be one of their top priorities, and at any point in time should be able to report on closures and cost savings to date and those planned for the next fiscal year. If these simple questions cannot be answered, we do not have adequate governance at the agency level. And finally, codifying the data center optimization consolidation effort the way FATAR does will ensure cost savings are tracked and reported, and that this initiative will span multiple administrations. I'd also like to mention, Mr. Chairman, your comment about GSA's data changing. That really shows the importance of this committee's oversight. Your staff made a couple key questions to GSA, and clearly we went from 0 reported centers to 74 in a couple days. And having that reported is very important so that we can perform the appropriate oversight. So in fact, those 74 data centers do get closed and their associated cost savings, and then we can think about optimizing the centers that remain open. So this concludes my statement, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Connolly. Thank you for your leadership on this topic, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, and we'll hold the questions until we've heard from Mr. Mazur. And he's the Chief Information Officer at the Department of Interior. Welcome, sir, and you're recognized.
Okay. Good afternoon. Good
Are they
afternoon,
on?
Chairman Micah and Ranking Minority Member Connolly. I would like to summarize my testimony and submit the full testimony for the record.
Without objection, we'll submit the additional data.
My name is Bernard Mazur. I currently serve as the Chief Information Officer for the Department of Interior. As a representative of the Federal CIO Council, I also serve as an executive sponsor of the Federal Data Center Consolidation Task Force. Thank you for providing the opportunity to testify regarding cloud computing and optimization of data centers across the federal government. The federal government's information technology infrastructure is a massive collection of networks. In the span of 11 years from 1998 to 2009, the number of federal data centers drastically increased from 432 to more than 1,100. The result was an inefficient federal data center population with unnecessary operations and maintenance cost. To reverse this trend, OMB in February 2010 launched the Federal Data Center Consolidation Initiative, referred to as FDCCI. A year later, in February 2011, the Federal Data Center Consolidation Task Force was chartered. The task force is comprised of agency representatives who are working together to share progress towards individual agency goals in the overall federal goals of optimization and consolidation. Today, the task force has contributed to the FDCCI by advising on policy and implementation, sharing information, best practices, and lessons learned, and by working with agencies to assess the benefits and challenges of cloud computing. One of the critical roles of the task force has been to share best practices. For example, the Department of the Interior has launched an IT transformation initiative to consolidate IT infrastructure operations at the department level, including data center operations, in order to eliminate redundancy and speed the adoption of new technologies such as the migration to cloud computing. Information provided by the task force has helped evolve the FDCCI. Under the March 13th OMB Memorandum on Portfolio Stat, the FDCCI was formally integrated into the Portfolio Stat and shifted the FDCCI focus from consolidation to both optimizing core data centers and consolidating non-core data centers. Through Portfolio Stat, agencies have already realized $300 million in savings, some of which is attributed to data center consolidation. The expected benefits moving to the cloud can be great and are driving the transition from existing hosting environments that focus on managing servers to modern cloud-based environments. These benefits include improving service delivery to customers, modernizing computing capabilities, enhancing collaboration, and replacing legacy information technology infrastructure. Moreover, as agencies refine their business processes during cloud migrations, they can also realize significant cost savings. The deployment of cloud tech computing also presents challenges, including culture and change management, data interoperability and portability, and a lack of expertise or experience in implementation of migrating to cloud computing technologies. Another challenge agencies have experienced is calculating cost savings related to optimization and consolidation. This requires calculation of the total cost of ownership, which is much more comprehensive than just equipment or energy cost. That is why the task force, working with participating agencies, GSA and OMB, are developing a total cost of ownership model. This model is now being used as a planning tool as agencies optimize and consolidate their data centers. Agencies are at different stages of moving IT applications to the cloud, and in doing so can leverage offerings from the Federal Risk and Authorization Management Program known as FedRAMP that provide a standardized approach to security for cloud products and services. In conclusion, federal agencies are continuing to make progress towards optimizing and consolidating data centers. Since launching the FDCCI, agencies have closed 484 data centers as of last week, with plans to close 855 by the end of the fiscal year 2013. The progress is being publicly tracked through data.gov. The FDCCI's integration into Portfolio Stat is expected to strengthen the focus on tracking cost savings, increase the number of tracked metrics, facilitate collaboration across agencies, expedite implementation of best practices, and should result in a consistent method for tracking cost. All of this is expected to result in a more accurate assessment of the benefits of this initiative. I am confident that cloud computing and data center consolidation has the potential to provide modernized IT at its significant cost savings. It is our job as Chief Information Officers to provide the evidence of these benefits to the American people. Chairman Mica, Ranking Member Connolly, this concludes my prepared statement. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have at this time.
Well, we'll go ahead with some questions, and let me first ask our GAO representative. Well, one of the basic questions is that this whole project was projected to save $3 billion, and I think that was by 2015. But I think I quoted you. The report is saying that the savings to date had not been tracked but were believed to be minimal. It seems pretty apparent now. We're getting some data in as a result of this hearing, but do you think they're going to be able to approach the goal and meet the goal, or what is your prediction now looking at this?
So a couple comments here. If you look at the projected cost savings, one time we had plans that were being updated. Now those plans are off the table since this is being merged under Portfolio Stat. But at one time we had about $2.4 billion in very preliminary plans. Inventories weren't complete yet. 2.2 of that billion came from DoD. Now there were some things where upfront costs needed to be considered. But if you look at this chart up here, the Ag and the DHS numbers, that comes from a report that goes to the appropriation committees. Those agencies are reporting already in FY13 the savings. And if you just project, 800 closures in DoD alone, $575 million in fiscal year 14 alone. Our thought is this: if you extend it beyond 2015 out to, and it's great to have these stretch goals near term, but I think $3 billion is very realistic. And when this initiative was started, there was a goal of $3 billion. At one time, OMB was talking about a $5 billion cost savings, then they went back to $3. So it's somewhere, who knows really where it is, but I think that's why you need good hard numbers on these closures. And if we have over 1,000 centers that we're closing, there has to be significant associated cost savings.
Mm-hmm. Well, what's interesting now, they've entered on the scene. We have this Portfolio Stat. I'm wondering if the consolidation as efforts sort of merge with this new thing, is this all going by the wayside, or do you see them as compatible?
They're clearly compatible. So if you look at the Portfolio Stat Initiative, and that's something we looked at very closely for the Congress. Portfolio
Tell me
Stat
how
is-
that's going to work,
So-
how you see it work.
Yeah, so what Portfolio Stat is, that takes commodity IT, so that's, you think of more as administrative systems, and it puts them in groupings, so HR
Mhm.
systems, financial management systems, email is a system. And OMB has an initiative which we highly commend their efforts on that, where they went to each of the agencies and they identified about 100 opportunities at the 24 major departments and agencies to save $2.5 billion. Okay, that was the first cut on
Mhm.
Portfolio Stat. Now, clearly, when you start looking at consolidating commodity IT and moving to the cloud, there's a lot of overlap with data center consolidation. So movement to the cloud, data center consolidation, Portfolio Stat, there's shared service approaches, all these different terms that they have. But the bottom line on all this, Mr. Chairman, is you have significant efforts. Portfolio Stat, $2.5 billion in savings. Data center consolidation, $3 billion in savings. They did some tech stat reviews looking at troubled projects, and the committees looked at that. Chairman, Ranking Member Connolly, I know you've looked at a lot of the troubled projects, that there are $3 billion in savings. All of a sudden, you do the math real quickly, and there's $7 or $8 billion in savings that we could spend more appropriately on modernizing government IT operations and furthering our mission. So that's why these savings are very significant, that we do things much more efficiently and save significant amount of money in the ballpark of, you know, $7 to $8, $9 billion.
Okay. Now, there's three components to making this consolidation effort work, as I understand. One is supposed to be OMB and sort of its oversight, GSA, and they have a program management office involved. And then we have the task force. Where, now, you said we need better leadership, was sort of a general statement with the CIOs, but somehow something's lacking here. We don't even have OMB willing to come in today and testify. Please be frank with us. Has OMB dropped part of the ball, the important part of the ball that is making this not work?
So our report is fairly balanced here, Mr. Chairman. It
No,
looks at-
just be honest. You don't
I
have
know,
to be
it looks at
balanced.
both OMB, GSA, and the task force, and they've done some things well. OMB has actually set the goals well, and we've got the ball rolling on
But they're
closure.
not,
But
it
they're
doesn't,
not tracking
they're not-
savings and not driving it to closure. GSA, they have a program office that's responsible for plans and inventories. Our work over there shows that plans and inventories have not been complete. Okay, we got agencies like
Mhm.
DOT where FAA wasn't reporting their air
Yeah.
traffic control facilities. And then when you look at what Mr. Mazar is doing, I think he's done a great job with the task force and the like, but we pointed out the peer review process was not where it needed to be. So all three organizations, we felt needed to do more from a leadership perspective.
Okay, and how, since we've got Mazer here, we'll pick on him a little. How can this task, how can their effort be improved? And do you cite that here in the report? I have not.
Yeah, we did cite that in there. That was a time, so the task force was put in place to perform peer reviews
Right.
of the various agencies, and we clearly made a very clear point that we thought there could be more peer review going across the agencies to help each other out. And I commend Mr. Mazar for his efforts to date, for him being here and what he's done to date, but I also think that task force can do better. It's similar to GSA and OMB.
Well, with that being said, Mr. Mazer, and as chair of the task force, where do you see, again, us going from here in your particular role, your important part of the equation?
Chairman, where I see the role of the task force is we appreciated GAO's examination of the overall FDCCI activities. In previous years, they were looking at the paucity of information populating what constitutes a data center. We are going to take into earnest the incorporation of the peer-to-peer reviews. We had those in the past. It'll keep agencies on course in terms of their schedules and in terms of filling out their inventory. The Federal Data Center Consolidation Initiative Task Force, as it's being integrated into the Portfolio Stat, It's really linked to the shared services activities that we're engaged upon about looking at these duplicative business systems like HR and financial management systems. It's related to the tech stat activities that we're looking at. What the Federal Data Center Consolidation Initiative is going to do is identify criteria for examining what will become core data centers and what will become non-core data centers. Non-core data centers, we're going to encourage those data centers either to move to the core data center or to move out into the cloud. But we're following the approach of optimizing the portfolio, which includes applications.
Can you define a little bit better the core and the non-core, just for the record?
Core, Chairman Micah, core data centers, we have examination of core data centers are those that are capable of delivering enterprise or private sector-like class services. They're reliable, they're secure, they're following green IT, and they have the capability to deliver a variety of services across an agency or across agencies. Non-core data centers are activities that might be specific to a location, or they might be supporting a particular scientific or monitoring type of system. Many of the non-core data centers are, in effect, really small data centers. You could sometimes characterize them as closets, or they're 500 square feet or less. There's a lot of cost inefficiencies about maintaining those, so we're going to encourage those to move to the core, or if they have applications, then we're going to look at the promise of moving those out into the cloud.
Well, finally, I don't want to give Mr. Conley plenty of time. Now we are considering, again, some update in legislation and working together on that. Have you looked at that? Is there anything that we are missing that would give us the tools to move forward from what you've seen, either on an agency basis, on the whole consolidation? Maybe you've reviewed some of what we've proposed, but we want to pursue giving all the tools necessary to expedite this. And sometimes, you have to have language that actually mandates certain actions because the agency are so inclined to stay static and not take initiatives. But maybe you could both quickly comment on, or briefly comment, anything you see.
Yeah, so on FATAR and the data center optimization section, a couple key things that we're very supportive of the bill is in the area of tracking and reporting key metrics. Not only do you want to track and report closures and cost savings, and that's very clear because there are cost savings here that need to be had, but you also have aspects of that bill that talk about optimization metrics, where you look at energy usage and those types of things, higher server utilization rates and that type of thing. So obviously you want both. You want the right metrics on closures and cost savings, but you want also the right metrics on optimizing what remains. And clearly I think that's something that the task force is chaired to do going forward as part of the portfolio stat. So I see your bill being very consistent with the direction that the administration is going. What it does is it mandates, codifies it in law, and it will ensure that it will span multiple administrations, because regardless of whether you want to look at this as 2015 or not, this is a long-term initiative that will go beyond 2015.
Chairman Mike, when I examined the administration, I don't believe has a position yet on the bill, but when I have examined the bill from the data center metrics perspective, it is a lot of those cost tracking metrics is what the Federal Data Center Consolidation Initiative is looking at. There are some things that we're looking at is about power usage effectiveness. We're looking at cost per operating system, virtualization. We're looking at ratios of employees to the amount of servers. And we're also looking at facility and storage utilizations. One of the activities that I feel good about the Federal Data Center Consolidation Initiative is, as we're looking at metrics, or we're attempting to look at metrics and all that have meaning and salience, and trying to comport ourselves into a 21st century information technology.
Very good. A little bit more frosted as we go on, and not seeing the two other witnesses. We'll have to definitely reschedule that, and we may have to have at least one of the witnesses back. Let me yield now to Mr. Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think the answer I just heard to your question of did we get it right on the FITAR bill we introduced, I thought I heard both Mr. Potter and Mr. Mazur said we got it absolutely right and don't change a word. It's perfect. I want to thank our panel for being here. Mr. Powner, you've had a chance to look at our legislation, which stands for Federal Information Technology Acquisition and Reform Act, which I referred to in my opening statement. And I heard your answer to the chairman's question that it does encapsulate some of the reforms we're trying to make, including what the task force is doing, and going even back to the 25-point plan that Vivek Kindra put out when he was CTO. Can you elaborate just a little bit about what it might achieve and how, if that legislation could perhaps help us with better compliance and better metrics and data center consolidation?
Well, I clearly think from a metrics point of view, it'll help significantly because it makes it very clear that cost savings are significant and that has to be reported and tracked. The other part of the bill that I think will help is CIO authorities. This is a CIO issue at every department and agencies. And clearly you got, it varies in terms of the progress and the reported cost savings that CIOs are currently making. We're all trying to get to a position where IT is more effectively managed at $80 billion, and we know that's understated based on some of the prior hearings that you've held. So I think in addition to the data center section, the CIO authority section also could play a significant role in moving the ball forward in this area.
At the moment, are you satisfied that OMB has consistent methods of evaluation to capture cost and cost savings with respect to data centers?
No, I'm not. We're not. In fact, what OMB told us is that they were not tracking cost savings and that the savings were minimal. So if you're going to establish a goal of closures and cost savings, we need to then track that and ensure that we actually drive it to closure. We have a lot of good plans in DC at times in the IT area. What we don't do is implementing them completely. And also folks aren't held accountable to implement it completely. This is a prime example.
Well, if they're not tracking cost savings, what do they think the consolidation effort is for?
That's a very good question, Mr. Chairman. So we did not agree. That's why we made the recommendation in our report that cost savings needs to be front and center in terms of metrics. And we can talk about optimization goals and all this other stuff, but we're optimizing the stuff that remains. Okay, all that closures, and even if those are all small wiring closets, 800 of them, there's a lot of money to be had with those. And if we get to a point where we have 11 or 1,200 centers, it would get to the 40%.
Can you refresh our memory, Mr. Powner, on how much these data centers expend, what it costs the taxpayers every year just on energy consumption?
I don't have good numbers on that.
Would about $450 million roughly sound right to you?
I would have to get back to you on that. It's likely even higher, though, if you start adding all the departments and agencies. If you look at DOD alone and you look at their centers,
Yeah.
And frankly, they're reporting some numbers that they probably would admit that they don't have a complete inventory yet.
It underscores your frustration, Mr. Chairman, which I share. We've got to have some consistent measurement by OMB, and for goodness sake, obviously cost savings are part of the goal here. Not the only goal, but a pretty important part of the goal. And if they're not consistently measuring that or even seeing it as a significant factor in making the decision about to stay open, to close, to consolidate, then they're not with the program. And certainly they're not consistent with the legislation we've introduced. Would that be a fair statement, Mr. Pound?
Yeah, so if you look at the IT budget, we spend $80 billion IT in the federal government, and 70% of that is operations and maintenance, which includes data centers. And the challenge going forward is to take some of that O&M spend and move it into systems development and acquisition, so we modernize the government and further the mission. But we spend a lot of money keeping the lights on, and if we can do it more efficiently in this example or movement to the cloud, we need to do more of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Mr. Mazur, you are a constituent. I cannot imagine a better spokesperson for this whole subject than yourself, hailing as you do from Annandale. But just a couple of questions. You chair the task force. What is the mandate of the task force?
The mandate of the task force was initially chartered to provide information sharing, examining best practices, to examine activities like power usage effectiveness, and to follow and optimize, or to follow working with the agencies on the schedules and all that foreclosure on activities.
But there is a goal, an end goal, which is this, to promote this consolidation.
It's to promote the consolidation, and it's also to promote the task force. We had a year gap of the peer review, but when the peer reviews that we had going forth and all that was having one agency encouraging another agency to either follow the tension of the schedule, or to follow attention with the scope, or to look at the missing inventory elements that are a part of what a data center consists of.
What are some, could you enumerate for us a little bit the process and the criteria used in the process for determining, or for helping to determine in that task force process, that sounds like an inefficiency, ought to close, ought to consolidate, or go entirely to the private sector? What are the criteria whereby you look at something going, that's great, don't change a thing, versus that's not so great, and maybe it ought to be in the closed list?
Well, what we're looking at is in terms of initially the task force was chartered to reflect on best practices, in reflection of noticing that we are having a problem coming to grips with what we have in our inventory is we started working on a series of metrics and all of that in terms of criteria. So some of the metrics that we're looking at is how much virtualizing we've done of the boxes. And we're establishing a standard for the U.S. government. We're looking at metrics in terms of how much floor space that we're using. We're looking at metrics in terms of the energy costs that we are looking at and establishing a baseline for those activities. We also are looking at metrics in terms of what's the ratio of things that are out in the cloud as opposed to the activities that are on premise. And right now the task force is engaged in establishing these metrics as a baseline, which will serve as the basis for when the portfolio sessions start in the summer, so that agencies will have a good apples-to-apples comparison of what costs are, what we should subscribe to.
I assume utilization is one of the criteria.
Yes, sir. Utilization is a heavy one of the criteria. We've got about 9 criteria I'd be happy to submit for you.
That would be very helpful, I think, to all of us, yes. Thank you. Yeah, because I would think in some ways, utilization alone could be a qualifier or disqualifier. I mean, if you find something grossly underutilized, it's a strong candidate for consolidation or elimination.
Yes, many of our servers are at 5% or 10%
Yeah.
utilization, which does create some.
I think that, could you repeat that, because I'm not sure that's fully appreciated. When we're looking at data consolidation, it isn't because we're obsessed with smaller numbers. It is because we're looking at how efficient it is.
Right, many of the when the teams have gone out and done either using automated tools or on-site examination of the capacity of the servers, many of them are woefully underutilized. There's more efficiency by putting multiple operating systems or applications on one particular server, particularly given the state of technology that it is today.
Right. Thank you. And final question for now. You mentioned FedRAMP. Could you just remind us all what FedRAMP is and give us a status as to where it is?
The status I will defer to my colleagues from GSA, but I will tell you
Yeah, but they're not here, Mr. Mason.
FedRAMP. Well, what FedRAMP is looking at is the security is a very important issue confronting the U.S. government, and how do we protect our data and our content. And what we have done over the past 10 years with the advent of the FISMA laws and all that is really establish a set of controls, and if agencies can subscribe to those particular controls, whether it's like access, availability, those types of activities, then they're saying, okay, they're reasonably protected given the categorization of that security. FedRAMP is a model whereas if anyone can subscribe to these set of controls, then they can be delivering that particular service. So FedRAMP is a model that, let's say a private sector company says, I've been able to do something for you, the U.S. government. They will follow the standards as promulgated by FedRAMP, and you'll have an independent auditor or a validator come in and say, yes, they're matching these controls. And it actually establishes a common baseline, so rather than every agency doing its own set of, I think the security should be this, or I think the security should be that, it subscribes to a standard baseline by which all private sector companies have subscribed to.
So another way of putting it might be, Mr. Mason, that what FedRAMP's designed to do is to set some common standards that other agencies buy into, and that helps us in terms of the acquisition process, Because the private sector now doesn't have to deal with 100
Right.
variations.
The private sector doesn't have to divine the intentions of each individual agency.
And are we expected to finalize that process
The
soon?
FedRAMP process is ongoing. There are a couple of, they call them, there's an acronym, forgive me if I can't break it out, 3 PAOs, that they are qualified to look at private sector companies as they're offering cloud services to the U.S. government.
So can we expect something soon?
There are 3, as agencies are migrating to the cloud, they will avail themselves of the FedRAMP, or private sector companies will avail themselves of the FedRAMP.
But you're anticipating we will proceed with FedRAMP as planned?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just final question, follow-up question. In your review, who's getting it right? Examples to look toward?
Agencies that are getting
Yeah.
it right. Well, you can look at some of those agencies. You know, typically DOD is an agency that we point a lot of flaws out when it comes to IT management, recently with the IT dashboard. Obviously, there's a lot of opportunity there for them to get it right. I turn to Mr. Mazur's organization, Interior, they're at the top of the list. You know, GSA was a latecomer up there, as we mentioned, but you have a number. DHS is also a leader. I mean, they were planning on going from 43 to 2 at one time, and now their numbers are a little bit different. But DOD, DHS, and Interior are clearly leaders up there.
Did you have anything else, Mr. Cummings?
Not at this
Okay.
time, Mr. Chairman.
Well, what we're going to have to do is thank you for being with us. We'll probably submit some additional questions to you from the committee. I didn't get to all that I wanted answered, and this is a kind of a meat and potato hearing, as you probably geeks would love this one, but it's,
Especially the acronyms.
yes, exactly. Well, I have to sort through them. I kept going back to make certain I knew what they were talking about. And you've been doing this, focusing on this a lot more than I, but very important. I mean, we're talking saving billions and actually much more efficiently operating. Sometimes when I go back after we've done our hearings together, Jerry, you see the debt we're in and the situation we're in financially. If you could just start implementing these things on a fast track, we could take that column of losses and get us into a much better fiscal condition. Now, again, I thank you for coming. I'm going to particularly we're going to ask Mr. Powner to probably come back when we have the other 2 witnesses, and maybe again you too, Mr. Baser. You can see how we have to have some other answers from OMB and GSA who are not with us today. So at this time, again, thank you. We'll excuse you, and I'll call up our second panel. Our second panel of witnesses I'll introduce as they're taking their seats. We have Mr. Steve O'Keefe, and he is the founder of Meritalk. We have Miss Teresa H. Carlson. She is the Vice President Worldwide Public Sector of Amazon Web Services. We have Mr. Kenyon Wells, Vice President of U.S. Federal CGI Federal. Those are our 3 industry panel witnesses. I think this will be an interesting panel. I always think it's great to hear from the government witnesses, and we had 2 key witnesses here today who provided us with their perspective, but I think those from the outside that are involved in IT and also data center consolidation that they undertake for the private sector and the public sector to get their on the ground first-hand evaluation and provide that to our subcommittee today. So with that, I welcome again Mr. O'Keefe, Ms. Carlson, and Mr. Wells. As I indicated before, this is an investigative panel of Congress. So if you haven't done so, we're going to do it now. We're going to ask you to stand and be sworn in. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give before this subcommittee of Congress is the whole truth and nothing but the truth? The witnesses have all answered in the affirmative. Let the record reflect that. And again, welcome you. We're fairly informal today, but we're trying to make certain that I've pre-read some of your testimony. Some of it's pretty long, but if you can consolidate your points, and if you have additional information on certainly your whole testimony will be included in the record. So with that, and then we'll go through all three of you, and then we'll do the questions rather than after each witness testifies. So I'm looking forward to all three of your testimonies. I've read a little bit about Mr. O'Keefe's and welcome him at this time and recognize him, and thank you again for participating.
Thank you. Chairman Micah, Ranking Member Connolly, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Steve O'Keefe, and I am not the voice for the Geico Gecko. As has been asked before, I'm in fact the founder of Meritor, the data center and cloud computing exchanges. These are public-private partnerships focused on delivering tangible increases in efficiency in government IT. I've spent more than 20 years listening to federal IT leaders talk about their challenges, their opportunities, and their frustrations. You've already heard a lot of numbers here today, but I'd like to cut to what's really important: tangible savings. I'm afraid that federal IT reform is like a bad reality TV show. There's no budget, the actors are powerless, the end is predictable, but somehow we still keep watching. We need to change the script. As you've noted, it is sad that OMB and GSA are not here. So when Vivek Kundra announced FDCCI in February of 2010, we've talked about this, OMB said that taxpayers would save between $3 and $5 billion by 2015. That's a lot of hamburgers. And so as we set tangible goals, we need to report against those goals, and I think that's what this is all about. Cloud 2 was billed as a IT budget crusher. Today, we're 18 months from the FDCCI savings, bless you, deadline. And we have no idea how much money we've saved the taxpayer, which is not right. I would argue we don't need to keep counting data centers. We need to understand how much we've saved, which agencies are doing it right, and what we need to do to accelerate savings. Let's get straight about this. To help surface some answers, Meritalk recently released a new study, and I'm Ross Perot style going to use some charts to illustrate. The study is called FDCCI, The Big Squeeze, and it is based on a survey of the operators in the agencies. What we want to do is learn from the people on the front lines what's going on. So a couple of statistics. 56% of data center leads give their agencies a C grade or below on FDCCI. I think earlier, Congressman Connolly, you asked if we were getting an A. It seems we're getting a C or below. I wouldn't be very excited if my children brought that grade home. Only half of feds believe their agency is on target to meet the FDCCI number of closures. Ironically, and this goes to one of the questions you asked earlier about electricity savings, feds believe that power is a significant area we're going to save a lot of money. But based on our meetings with federal data center leads, we found that 1 in 20 data center executives have an understanding of what they pay for electricity. So that's a significant blind spot. What about top obstacles? What we see is that feds cite budget constraints, mission owner objections, and the inability to consolidate applications as the biggest obstacles to progress, which gives me the impression that the motto for the data center leads should really be the beatings will continue until morale improves. They have no ability, they're not empowered to change the equation. So it's great to point out what the challenges are, but let's go on the positive side and look at what we should do in order to remedy the situation. We call this our 5-point plan. And the points are, number 1, don't hide. Our concern is that by merging FDCCI with Portfolio Stat, we're going to be gerrymandering the metrics. And so we're concerned about that. We need to set realistic goals in the open and publish real status on success and failures. And yes, failures if that's what transpires. OMB has a total cost of ownership model. I think Mr. Meza referenced it. In this era of open government, why does OMB insist on keeping this a secret? Why not publish the TCO model so we could find out where the money is? Number two, there's no money. Recognize that there is no new money to fund data center optimization. And so with that, we need to empower the CIOs to rationalize applications and maybe try some new approaches, because we know the old ones have failed. Number three, application rationalization. If you do not cut the number of applications, you will not cut the number of data centers. The Army is running over 100 operating systems because it has so many legacy platforms. I think GAO flagged this. Uncle Sam does not need 622 HR systems. I think we can all agree on that. 4, marry IT and facilities. Wouldn't it seem logical that the data center lead should understand and own the budget for the total data center environment? GSA owns most of the facilities and pays the electricity bills. Why not publish the energy bills for each data center so we'd have a better sense for how to proceed? There are a series of new energy contracts out there, the energy savings performance contracts, and we'd like to see those moving forward more aggressively. 5, public-private partnership, please. Why don't we recognize that government is not the only organization that operates data centers? We can learn a huge amount from industry. Organizations like NASDAQ have put forth data center consolidation optimization initiatives. Let's look at some of those metrics. Now to cloud. The on-ramp to federal cloud, FedRAMP, is horribly congested. We talked about problems with traffic earlier. In fact, you can hear the honking on the digital highway right now as software companies line up to try and get through cloud certification. After almost a year in operation, GSA's FedRAMP team has only certified 2 cloud service providers. How are agencies supposed to move to cloud when there are only 2 applications? It's just not feasible. If the cost of FedRAMP certification and the delays outweigh the volume of business that solution providers receive from agencies, then industry will take another road. That said, cloud acquisition vehicles are sorely needed. In closing, it's time to get real about federal IT modernization. Are the agency CIOs really in charge and therefore accountable for results? This question has very real implications for FITARA. Richard Spire's recent experience at the Department of Homeland Security makes all CIOs question whether they have authority or not. We're ready and willing to discuss our initiatives and recommendations. We look forward to working with you to deliver improved efficiency in federal IT and welcome any of your questions. Thank you for the opportunity to talk today.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your testimony and your candor. Let's turn next to Teresa Carlson, Vice President for Amazon Web Services. Welcome, and you're recognized.
Good afternoon, Chairman Micah and Ranking Member Conley.
She's not coming in very loud.
Is it turned on? There's a switch.
Yep.
Is that better right
Yep.
there?
Yeah.
Okay. Good afternoon, Chairman Micah and Ranking Member Conley. My name is Teresa Carlson, and I'm the Vice President of Amazon Web Services Worldwide. Thank you very much for inviting me to testify today on the federal data center optimization and transition to cloud computing, and to discuss how the U.S. federal agencies can do more with less and to save taxpayer dollars. I'd like to submit my written testimony.
Without objection,
for
your
record.
entire statement will be part of the record.
Also, I wanted to thank the university for having us here today. I spent many Saturday and Sundays here at swim meets with my sons, and it's in beautiful Fairfax County, and it's a beautiful day, so I really appreciate them having us here as well. Companies that leverage Amazon Web Services in the commercial sector range from large enterprises such as Bristol-Myers Squibb, Shell, NASDAQ, to innovative startups like Pinterest and Dropbox. Throughout the U.S. federal government, agencies and departments are adopting AWS for a wide range of technology infrastructure services and applications, to include groups like the U.S. National Institutes of Health, NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and the U.S. Department of the Navy, and the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. AWS is passionately committed to sharing the benefits we can achieve as a cloud provider to federal government agencies, and our economies of scale have resulted in the rapid innovation of public cloud services and lowering the price for our customers. Specifically, we've lowered our cloud computing prices 31 times since 2006. Let me repeat 31 times with no one pressuring us to lower those prices. We lowered those prices based on our savings and providing them back to the customer. Given the proven secure and game-changing efficiencies of cloud computing, we believe that the FDCCI should be directly linked to the Office of Management and Budget's Cloud First policy in order to be truly successful in the data optimization model. While there's no doubt that some federal government workloads can continue to operate in government-owned data centers, there are a very large number of workloads that should be more suitable and efficiently managed in large-scale commercial cloud platforms. Therefore, the adoption of cloud computing services should be a central part of the federal strategy. One way to think about cloud computing is that instead of buying and owning and maintaining their own data centers or servers, federal agencies can acquire technology resources as compute, power, and storage on an as-needed basis and dispose of it when it's no longer needed. In fact, we have something called a trusted advisor service where we actively work with our customers to turn off servers when they're not being utilized. And they actually don't even have to worry about what their electric bill is because that's part of the service we provide and it's part of the pricing model. So they'll know that in real time. And users only pay for what they use by the compute hours or storage gigabit. And they are not locked. They are not locked to any long-term contracts. They can choose long-term contracts, but they're not locked into anything like that. There's many, many examples of federal agencies that have begun to embrace the cloud. A couple I'd like to highlight for you today is NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab. When the Mars Space Lab, also known as the Curiosity, successfully landed last year, public cloud computing infrastructure from AWS was utilized in support of various aspects of the mission, including the public outreach around the landing itself so everyone in the United States and the world could enjoy that landing, as well as the data and image pipeline, the pipeline management dealing with all the new data streaming that was actually coming down from Mars. Tom Soderstrom, the CTO of NASA JPL, described this way. JPL has leveraged cloud services to dramatically reduce IT costs and in the process increasing their agility and decrease the time to science while enabling JPL to have complete flexibility when using those computing resources. In fact, we worked with them in a very short period of time to get that set up. It did not take months for them to procure and set that up. The U.S. Department of the Navy CIO's office recently initiated a pilot project to move unclassified data to the commercial cloud environment. The Secretary of the Navy's public-facing information portal is now on AWS, and they also have an initiative to work on a strategy to migrate all public-facing sites. And he's already said, the CIO, Terry Halverson, stated that the department has achieved a 50% reduction in cost to operate this portal. Let's imagine for a moment if that level of cost savings could be applied to all federal IT spending. How much money could that actually be? And I believe it's a lot more than those $3 billion that were initially brought up. The reality is that cost savings is only part of the picture, and that what we think is a fundamental and clearly a need to transition to cloud computing, and this will be a big part of the optimization for the data center consolidation. There are many companies out there that have already taken full advantage of that in the commercial side, like Netflix, to move their entire infrastructure to the cloud. We think there's exciting opportunities out there to actually do a lot more with cloud services. We support what you've done already in both FITARA and FDCCI, and we appreciate having the opportunity today to speak to you and are prepared to answer any questions. Thank you again.
Well, thank you also, and we'll turn now to our final witness on this panel, Mr. Kenyon Wells, Vice President of U.S. Federal, CGI Federal. Welcome, and you're recognized.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Micah, Congressman Connolly. Thank you very much for the opportunity to appear before you today. My name is Kenyon Wells, and I'm Vice President at CGI Federal Incorporated, a global information technology and business processes services firm. I'm honored to provide some thoughts today about ongoing efforts for federal agencies to optimize their use of their data centers and move to greater use of cloud computing technology. CGI applauds the subcommittee not only for its continued efforts to eliminate wasteful IT spending, but also for its recognition that continued investments in IT will save money, improve efficiency, and provide better services to U.S. citizens and businesses. In particular, CGI thanks the leadership of this subcommittee, as well as Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Cummings, and the full Oversight and Government Reform Committee for bringing many important issues to light with the introduction of H.R. 1232, the Federal Information Technology Acquisition Reform Act, and for the open and transparent manner in which that legislation was drafted. In February of this year, CGI became just the second company to be granted a FedRAMP Cloud Security Provisional Authority to operate. CGI is now delivering more than $100 million in secure cloud solution to dozens of federal programs, in addition to many other cloud implementations for state government and commercial clients. Based on these projects and discussions with other federal agencies, CGI offers the following observations. First, there is significant progress, but more can be done. There are two major drivers that lead to immediate cost savings for agencies in adopting cloud computing. One of these is the speed with which new systems can transition to go live in the cloud. For example, CGI worked with GSA to bring 30 systems live in less than 90 days. As a result, that agency program has reduced their overall server footprint by 50 to 70%. The other immediate cost savings driver is that agencies only pay for the capacity they need. So instead of running data centers that continuously provide peak capacity that is always underutilized, CGI's cloud clients have significantly lower day-to-day costs and pay only for added capacity when it's needed. These immediate savings are a great achievement, but longer term, the consolidation of data centers and migration to the cloud are but a step on the journey towards federal IT modernization and consolidation. These more holistic efforts will eventually deliver savings that dwarf the numbers we're talking about for DCCI today. Second observation, cost savings are often difficult to quantify. It's a lot of what we're talking about here today. We've seen some of the reality as to why agencies struggle with it. And as the GAO report indicates, many agencies do struggle to determine just how much they save under consolidation initiatives. The challenges here are exacerbated by the lack of baseline IT costs on an agency-by-agency basis. Additionally, there are some initial costs associated with moving to cloud computing or closing down data centers, which can delay the initial cost savings, even though an agency will save significantly in the long run. Third, significant acquisition challenges exist. In discussions with numerous agencies on this topic, CGI has seen many that have struggled to modify the procurement methods when purchasing cloud services. Cloud computing not only represents a fundamental change in how IT services are delivered, but also how they're procured. A focus on using readily available contract vehicles could significantly accelerate cloud migration. Additionally, Congress and the administration could provide agencies with more freedom to enter into innovative agreements with industry to allow government to significantly reduce its upfront costs of the public-private partnership we were talking about. Many of CGI's commercial and state government clients have entered into agreement where CGI assumes the initial transition costs so those clients can start saving on day one. If the federal government wants to do more with less, then it should embrace new methods of contracting that shift that risk and upfront cost to industry partners. Finally, strong leadership and interdepartmental cooperation increase the results from cloud. CGI commends DoD, DHS, and GSA for their collaboration as members of the Joint Authorization Board overseeing the FedRAMP program, which represents a significant and necessary step forward as the federal government looks to implement the cloud. FedRAMP's common risk framework for all agencies is a critical piece of the puzzle that eliminates the needs for highly customized solutions that often hold no real extra benefit and severely increase cost. Moving forward, FedRAMP's continuing monitoring process is more frequent and more detailed than those already in place at most federal agencies, which will create more confidence in security around commercial providers who receive their PATO. This will be followed on by the new DHS-led efforts around continuous monitoring, which will only help push this effort forward so that agencies and Congress know both what IT assets an agency has and how they're secured. Thank you once again for the opportunity to participate in this important hearing. Since I'm a few seconds under, I'll add two additional things. One, thank you very much for holding this hearing here in my alma mater, though this campus looks very different than when I was here a couple of decades ago. And finally, since it's a few days from Mother's Day, I want to thank my mother and brother who surprised me by attending today, and thank her for making me come to this school and therefore be here. So I look forward to any questions
Well,
that you may
we have
have.
a lot of mothers to be thankful for. But nice to have some of your family with you at successful alumni return and be a witness today. interesting perspective from the private sector. Mr. O'Keefe, it's your first of your 5-point recommendations. It seemed to differ a little bit with what I got out of Mr. Powner. I asked about the compatibility or what was going on with portfolio stat, and it was interesting. I guess under portfolio stat, agency is no longer required to submit the previously required consolidation plans, and the memorandum does not identify a cost savings goal. You, of course, in your first recommendation said that's not the way to go. So I guess you differ a little bit with the testimony we had from GAO.
I think it's just very important to be consistent. If we said we were going to save, $3 billion or
Yeah.
$5 billion or however many
Don't-
billion dollars it is,
Don't try to
don't keep changing the rules. So I think we just need to be consistent in terms of what we're doing. And I'm, again, also very interested to see this TCO model, which Mr. Mazur talked about.
The secret TCO model.
Right. I don't see why that wouldn't be. This is an era of open government. Why can't we see the way the agencies are measuring, or OMB is measuring efficiency?
We would have liked to ask that question to OMB today, but we will ask it at a future
The
hearing.
spirit of open
Yes.
government did not hear.
And I have to, first of all, I have to compliment this panel, Mr. Conley. My experience has been that it's been just like pulling teeth to get anybody from the private sector to come before any of our investigative or oversight hearings. I mean, they run like scalded dogs from us because they're so afraid of the agencies coming down on them for some reason or participating with us. So I thank you. I think you're providing a very valuable public service and insight, and I think it's important that we hear from people who are dealing with government on a day-to-day basis, see how things work and don't work, and then make recommendations to us. So, again, I thought Mr. O'Keefe, excellent points here. Now, the other problem we have is I think you highlighted in one of your recommendations that GSA owns most of the facilities. I guess they pay the power bills and things like that. So there's not the accountability. There's not the there's no incentive. How do you change that now? And then we have pending legislation. I asked the question of the other panelists. Do we need to do more to beef up the pending legislation? So first I'll ask that, then I have another question. Have you read any of the proposed legislation? I think some of you actually participated. It's a fairly open process. Will it resolve some of these issues? I don't think it's going to resolve that one.
If I might, I mean, I think that the language of FATARA is great, but the message in terms of empowering the CIO, which is critical in terms of the success of the program, runs contrary to what we've seen from an experience standpoint. I mentioned the experience with Richard Spires, who recently was put on leave at Department of Homeland Security and then resigned very recently. And it just doesn't seem as though that there's real support from for the CIOs to stand up against the components and the mission owners. And if that's the case, then, you know, given the experience with Richard Spires, I'm not sure other federal CIOs are going to rush to stand up because the support hasn't been there. So the language, I think, for FATARA is good, but we have to show that support.
Language and empower the CIO more, or?
I think we absolutely should empower the CIO more, but again, language is one thing. You know, it's actions which are going to be more important.
It's interesting because actually some of my first work many years ago was looking at government organizations and restructuring governments, primarily local governments. And after some years of doing that, you know, we could write the best charter of government and guidelines and everything, and then you get lousy people, and they couldn't implement, and sometimes you would have lacking legislative authority or a charter, and you get people who are creative and innovative, and they could succeed. So sometimes it's hard to craft that now, but we want to make certain that we give them the tools to be able to do the job. So there's a disconnect between the facilities, the energy, things of that sort. So maybe there could be some change there. That's a tougher one, Mr. Conley. I'm trying to think of things again that would empower a CIO to move forward. The thing that drives you nuts with government, you've seen it, is people making a decision, or then the lack of with this FedRAMP and the certification of for cloud participation. We're up to 2, you say?
Yes.
Yeah. And how long has that taken?
Almost a year.
A year.
So we've been going through the FedRAMP process. We're very close, but it's a very long process. And I do really appreciate what, the FedRAMP office is doing, because security is obviously very important. But the one thing is, once it's there, they need to be able to utilize it. Because if you begin to put more and more controls, every agency comes back and puts more controls on top of the FedRAMP process, then you really don't have a FedRAMP process. You just have a FedRAMP process plus.
And it goes on and on.
And it goes on, and it never comes to fruition. And then I think the second thing is the cloud first policy. In order for this to really make sense, I do think they need measurements, almost back to what Steve was saying. They need measurements in there to say, here's the real progress we've made toward cloud first, around the application consolidation effort as well, because you're only going to truly get there when you begin to take a look at what are those applications that you've done. How are you looking at the total picture of actually the consolidation effort?
Does anybody know how many cloud certification requests are pending?
There are over 80.
Over 80?
Yes. Now, many of those were just in the last couple of months, but there
Okay.
were about 40 in December.
Okay, so huge number. So we need to get, first of all, some stability in the certification process and people certified, then some motivation and some empowerment of those charged with this responsibility to move forward, and again, some accountability in the system. I'm
Mr.
going
Chairman.
down. I'm going down O'Keefe's recommendations here. I thought it was a good summarization of some of the things that we needed, but. Do not need 600 HR systems. That got me because we started looking at Office of Personnel Management, and I think they've blown either $350 million or $500 million. And finally, I was told, were any of you involved in that? No, but or observed it. Then they finally settled on a smaller contract after blowing lots of money and attempts, smaller contract, and then they discarded that. Now I understand they're going back to almost hand processing. That's the Office of Personnel Management for the federal government. And then we have 600 HR systems on top of that. So I can't even begin to imagine how much we spend in sort of a mundane process. Not that there aren't variations for background checks and all kinds of information to be combined. The other thing is on retirement systems. That whole area again is just unbelievable money that's been spent, and I guess my comments were actually the hand processing for retirees is what they've gone back to. Very costly. They've just hired more and more personnel and abandoned IT as a solution. Is that?
The opportunity there, especially with cloud computing, is the ability to not have to spend millions of dollars to test out systems. So with the cloud computing model, you can set up and design something in a very small way without spending a lot of money. And then if that works, you move it into the test and dev environment, and then right from there, you can move it into production and then scale it. So you don't have to build a system for complete scale and then try to deploy it. So again, that's another opportunity, because your cost, if you fail, you can fail fast, use those failures as understandings, and then recover. And you don't even have to throw away all that code. It's actually can be utilized for the success that you need.
And then taking that one step further, that makes sense, complete sense for custom applications. But getting back to the retirement system and the HR systems and all the other common systems that every agency has to use, moving towards software as a service, where you actually have a handful of applications that have been pre-certified and FedRAMP certified, that then agencies don't have to start from scratch. They don't have to reinvent the wheel. They'll have a handful of them, so hopefully more than that, enough to make it a competitive market space, but stuff they know works, so that at least we can streamline that.
The final question, and actually motivated by Ms. Carlson, is she had cited those that she felt were getting it right, and she talked about Joint Propulsion Lab, NASA, Navy. Have you, the others, are there good examples? I think it's always good to see who's doing things well and what steps they've taken, how they got to that success. And go ahead.
I can add an additional one. Department of Homeland Security.
Which is stunning to me, because I think it's one of the loose cannons of federal government, but that's another matter.
It, as was discussed earlier, has certain challenges, both based on size and the politics involved, but there is some very good work being done there. And a couple of years ago, they purposely went down their own data center consolidation into two large DC1, DC2 data centers. And more recently, when they decided to embrace cloud, they decided to go two different routes. One, build a private cloud on site in government infrastructure, since so much of their stuff is so sensitive. And second, to conduct a procurement to select a government community cloud, an external provider who has all the appropriate certifications. We were lucky enough to win that contract.
Well, I'd have to go back and look at that, because I think almost all of our terrorist incidents, even to Boston, we still can't connect the dots. Maybe Homeland's doing a good job, but they haven't connected to state and other agencies, and it is very sensitive information. But I don't know. But you're just talking from a practical and
Right.
implementation standpoint.
So,
not
for example, they started with a couple of very small websites. They got comfortable with it, started adding more. Now all of DHS's public sector, public-facing websites.
and it is a
are in our
newer
cloud.
agency. So,
Correct.
Mr. O'Keefe, any?
NOAA has also done a very good job. The weather guys
NOAA.
Have put forth excellent progress in terms of modernization.
Just their IT. We still have a lot of people.
They've consolidated a lot of their data centers. They've built a $2.4 billion data center out in Martinsburg, West Virginia, and they're operating at tremendous levels in terms of energy efficiency and such.
Well, I could go on. I have a whole bunch of questions I'd like to get. Let me let Mr. Conley have a shot here. I went well over my time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was actually very interesting line of questioning. Ms. Carlson, in your prepared testimony, I would like to cite something you said, because, Mr. Chairman, I think it sort of encapsulates the whole challenge of cloud for the federal government. You say one way to think about cloud computing is that instead of buying, owning, and maintaining their own data centers or servers, federal agencies can acquire technology resources such as computing power and storage on an as-needed basis and dispose of it when it no longer is needed. Many industry experts refer to this as a utility model of obtaining and using IT capability, analogous to how the government obtains access to water, gas, or electrical power. Users only pay for what they use. That's a pretty common sense model. What's your understanding of how the government looks at that? For example, the task force, to the extent you're aware of their process, are they also looking at junk the whole thing and go private sector using this model?
I think it's a very good question. I think some are really evaluating that as they begin to look at this undifferentiated heavy lifting that they're trying to do when they can have what I call more mission for the money. why not utilize your dollars for the true mission and not worry about building out infrastructure in these tools? And it's a very common model that's used now in hundreds of thousands of customers in 190 countries. But for government, it is still an aha moment when we actually show them that they can provision virtual machines like that on a portal. It's all, they just can't believe it. And as Mr. Wells was saying, when that's configured and it's FedRAMP, all they have to do is go provision it. They don't have to wait 6 months for the supply chain management. It's there and available. And it's very, from a mission perspective, it's really a game changer for the U.S. federal government.
And one acknowledges it may not always be appropriate, but it is an option
That's
that
correct.
needs to be on the table.
And we don't suggest that they just jump in. Like we suggest they take the opportunity to learn, because it is a big culture shift, and we understand that. And the agencies that are getting there, it has taken them a little bit of time, but they're gradually moving more and more, and they're really smart architects and engineers and research scientists now they enjoy the fact that they have capacity on demand as they need it, and then they can shut it down, and they can see how much it costs. They can look at a portal and know immediately how much they're spending and the servers that aren't being utilized, and they can be turned off, and we help them with that. And that's really the key. We want them to be able to reduce costs so they can do more and have all the other components around
And
security.
I'm going to come back to that. Mr. Wells, you look like you wanted to talk address that as well.
Yeah, we're in absolute agreement with this. And if you think about the overall federal portfolio, what could go to the cloud, what can't. Under FSMA, they have to categorize all of their applications low, moderate, or high. Low basically is obviously a system that doesn't have quite the same level of barriers as the others. FSMA moderate means normally there's Privacy Act data in it, PII, the kind of stuff we're worried about for identity theft, HIPAA data, confidential but unclassified, confidential business information, regulatory data, stuff that you really don't want to get out. And there are a number of controls put in place, defined by NIST to do that. Low and moderate together is 88% of the entire federal portfolio. 12% is classified FSMA high. That 12% is normally national security or critical infrastructure protection, the stuff that.
I want to make sure we all understand what you just said. So what you're saying is that in that evaluation, 88% of the federal market, in this market, would lend itself to private sector cloud computing.
Correct, and that's for FSMA moderate. A FedRAMP FSMA moderate is a higher bar than a normal FSMA moderate. A normal FSMA moderate certification, as defined by NIST, is 252 controls. When the FedRAMP program sat down with all the different agencies to try to come up with what would they all accept, they ended up with 298 controls. And so it's a much higher bar, and they tried to get every agency to say, all right, what's the unique thing that you absolutely have to have? Fine, we'll incorporate that into the standard. But still, many of those agencies will take that FedRAMP certified infrastructure or application, and they'll still want to do their own security checks on it again. That, I think, will be unnecessary as we go forward. Now, the FedRAMP process is still in early stages.
Excuse me, but if they want to do that, for example, your services allow for that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, that's a requirement.
Yeah,
well.
in fact, we create a package and we make it very easy. And we sit down and they go through each and every control. And I actually might say that there's a lot of commercial companies that look and utilize the FSMA and FedRAMP process. We have many that say they go through the controls as a commercial company because they think it is a good housekeeping
Yep.
seal of approval for security.
It is the one area that I can say the federal government is probably ahead of the commercial sector from IT. And if the controls are followed and applied, it may not always be done the most efficient method possible, but it is much more secure.
You mentioned, Ms. Carlson, JPL, and you said they achieve significant savings, dramatically saved IT costs, were
Yes.
your actual words. Could you just elaborate a little bit on that? Because I think that's one of the things we're looking for, and I'm going to come back to Mr. O'Keefe, if I may, Mr. Chairman, but to talk about cost savings, but we need models where you can look at the reluctant players and say, don't be so afraid, it works, and you'll be the better off for it. Tell us a little bit about JPL, your experience with JPL.
Yeah, so one quick thing about JPL is they were seeing a trend where their engineers and researchers were trying to build their own OSs, their own operating systems, and it was highly inefficient. They were concerned about security. They knew that they needed capacity when they needed it. So they started looking toward a cloud computing model to fulfill that. And then as a result, they gained a lot of knowledge over the last few years. But this one particular program that I talked about, and they can tell you the exact dollars better, but they said they paid 10% of the original cost by using a cloud computing model. They also have talked about another major MARS program that they've run. The program manager told me if it hadn't been for the utilization of cloud computing, they would have had to shut the program down, because the original Mars Curiosity kept going. Like, they didn't think that the little buggy would go very long, right, 2 months, and it was still running around taking pictures after 6 months, 7 months. And all that amazing data being streamed from Mars, they wanted the ability to take advantage of that for educators, researchers. But they couldn't store it, they couldn't manage it, it was very costly. So as a result, that was another reason they looked to cloud. And I wanted to point out where we've seen the real push in cloud in the federal government is more on the program side, because the programs begin to say, I don't have money, like I don't have enough money. So they look for options to keep their programs going. And then they begin to find that there are new realities out there of how they can deliver IT and really transform it. So I think NASA JPL is a great example. And another one is Health and Human Services that's doing across the board, and many of their agencies are utilizing cloud now, especially for open and transparent programs like the 1,000 Genomes, the Autism Database, BioSense. They're starting to look for ways that they can provide citizen services that are effective, but again, reduce cost and be able to scale when they need to scale things.
And Mr. Wells, you're one of the 2 companies certified so far for
Correct.
this activity. Presumably, in your experience with various federal clients, you've also been able to identify significant cost savings for the client.
Correct. And I think a lot of it comes back to what Teresa was just describing as far as the elasticity and that sort of thing. So for example, I was mentioning the DHS websites earlier. One of those is FEMA.gov and Ready.gov, which is their disaster preparedness site. And moving that into the cloud out of one of their data centers used to be that they had to build the infrastructure in their data center to the peak capacity they would ever think they would need. But when it's not hurricane season, when there's not a major disaster, they need less than 1/10 of the power for those websites that they do need when there's a disaster. So when Superstorm Sandy was coming ashore, the president held a press conference and he said, go to ready.gov, there's disaster preparedness information there, take a look at that. And that was up and running in our cloud, and we instantly saw a huge spike, nearly 100-fold increase in the amount of activity on that. And the elasticity of the cloud allowed us to spin up those services and spin them back down a few days later when they weren't necessary.
That's a great example. I would think particularly apt for you, Mr. Micah, coming from Florida, in terms of the spiking in hurricane season and then coming down.
And one other cautionary aspect to that tale, which I'll throw out there, is that at the same time we saw all this incredible spike in people flooding to the site, the spike in number of attacks on those sites, denial of services attacks, attempts at hacking, etc., spiked as well. And the people in our security operations centers were watching it and were having to do some things to make sure that there was no interruption in service, but coming back to even a public-facing website that most of the year may not seem so critical, for a brief period is absolutely mission critical. And it's a sad testament that's the world we live in, that as soon as people start paying attention to it, people start attacking it.
Sure.
But that is the case.
Yeah. Well, that's another hearing for us, cybersecurity, because it's an incredible problem. Mr. O'Keefe, I was really struck by your presentation. Thank you. And I thought the point you made with Chairman Micah was an excellent one. It isn't, well, hopefully we do have it right. I mean, the idea that we have 250 plus CIOs in 26 agencies tells you what you need to know in terms of accountability.
Right.
And decision-making. We have to change that. But that alone, and maybe hopefully legislatively we've got that right. Enumerating the authorities and powers of that designated CIO, even that doesn't necessarily solve the problem, because what you're getting at is a culture. And changing a culture is always difficult. what are the attributes, if we were to have a successful cultural change in the CIO, you would look for, given private sector experience in the federal government?
Well, I think metrics are very, very important. The CIO is not a IT person. They're not putting together wires. They're not provisioning systems. This is a business professional. And so what we need to do is establish some real metrics. I think that everybody is afraid of accountability. And so what we see is that people run away from coming up with any metrics at all. No metrics at all is better than any kind of metrics whatsoever, because you're going to be held accountable for them. So I think we have to, let's look at the private sector. When we look at data center consolidation, whether it's NASDAQ or Dow or whoever it may be, private sector organizations, they've done data center consolidations. And it's not a one-time operation, it's an ongoing operation. How long does it take to consolidate data centers or optimize data centers? How much does it cost? How much money do we have to put into the process in order to get something out of the process? Looking at things like PU, it's another acronym, but it's a metric which shows the power efficiency of data centers. I think what we need to have is a practical framework in order to move the ball forward, and we need to make sure that when we make commitments that we measure ourselves against those commitments. And sometimes we're going to fail, but let's be open about what's actually transpiring. So I think, as far as the CIO role across agencies go, they need to have authority, and with authority, was it Spider-Man said, with great power comes great responsibility.
Well, one of the things I've heard from Mr. Spires and others who were CIOs or are CIOs from the private sector in the federal government, we need more flexibility and authority to award contracts, to make decisions about this system, not that system, close that, open that, not dictatorial powers, but everything by committee means the path of least resistance, the least risky, but also the lowest payoff kind of outcome. And again, briefly, you might want to comment on that as well, in terms of the powers that we want to infuse CIOs with.
I think you're exactly right. A camel is a horse built by committee. And so in many circumstances, what we see is a lot of different camels running around the beltway. And so we need to be prepared to take some chances on new approaches, whether that's cloud computing or what you will. I think that the cholesterol that we see in programs like FedRAMP, the cure can be worse than the disease. So if we don't simplify what's going on, then we're never going to see any real progress.
And that's my final question, actually, about FedRAMP. By the way, I would say to you, Mr. Micah, that sometimes we're the problem. If you want to understand why we have a risk-averse culture in the federal government, Congress has to bear some responsibility here. The minute somebody makes a mistake, if somebody thinks there's political advantage in exploiting that mistake, we have a hearing and we call you before Congress and we threaten you with subpoenas. And, well, who the hell wants to take a risk and face all of that? And we know in the private sector, I spent 20 years in the IT world of the private sector, some things work and some things don't. And a lot of what is considered highly successful today started out failing. And it took a lot of, and if private sector entities had not, if they'd had the tolerance for failure we have in the federal government, a lot of this would not have happened, I submit. Final question, FedRAMP. The idea that there are 80 pending applications, and my guess is, by the way, that could have been more. People got discouraged.
That's right.
Who wants to wait that long? And only 2 have been approved. What's your sense of the problem? What's the nature of the problem? What should we do to try to accelerate the certification process?
I think perfection is the enemy of the good. And so we're trying to solve for every scenario, and that's just not practical. So we need to simplify the process. That's really it.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. I think it can evolve. I don't think it has to be perfect out of the gate, but I believe it's already, by the way, a very, very solid process. And they need to be confident in what they've developed already and get it out there and try it. It doesn't mean that you can't come back around and hold the companies accountable once they've gotten the FedRAMP. They need to be able, which we do. We have to show that we're patching and doing everything appropriately. But I believe they need to be confident in what they've developed, and also the agencies probably need to get more involved, because the FedRAMP office themselves is not going to be able to do everything, so the agencies are going to have to work with the FedRAMP office and the vendor to certify in the appropriate way, along with the 3PO.
I think the process is slowly getting better, just to say something positive out there. But it is important to remember that the FedRAMP requirement was, in the end, the result of something of a political process. Again, the JAB wanted to make sure that this standard would be acceptable to all of the various agencies out there. So whenever someone would throw in a new barrier, they would add it to the list. So the bar is high. And the bar should be high. But if they had a little bit more authority, or there was agreement on, amongst all the agencies that let's bring this down a couple of notches, it would streamline the process a great deal. But let's also recognize this is a brand new process with a brand new program that is, trying to do something really groundbreaking across the entire federal market space. So while I'd love for it to go better, I do want to give them some recognition that they're trying something very ambitious.
Very helpful. I want to join the chairman in thanking our panel. I think very thoughtful, very insightful. I will add, though, and I know Mr. Michael shares this, there is no way Congress is going to continue to allow this process to go forward without cost saving being a major criterion. The idea that it's sort of incidental to the process and sometimes not even factored at all is a stunning thing to learn in the current environment. And by the way, takes an efficiency off the table. You said in your testimony, Ms. Carlson, that in some cases there could be 50% effectuated savings. Well, in an $80 billion IT budget, let's just extrapolate that out. 50% saving across the board means we've taken $80 billion, not changed the appropriation one bit, but it's worth $120 billion. I mean, in terms of its buying power and so forth. So, but we're actually shrinking budgets, and so we've got to look for efficiencies. And I think the private sector is going to help us figure that out, because I don't know that left to our own devices we're going to do it.
Just one point. As far as appropriations go, one of the challenges is exactly on the Hill, in as much as if you look to close data centers and they're closed in specific people's district, that's not real popular. So that's definitely a factor in this equation, right? If you try to close, the whole point of closing data centers is you have to shut them. And if that data center is in a specific district, that can be a problem. So it can be somewhat of a circular discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you so much for your indulgence, and thank you so much for holding this hearing.
Well, it is interesting, very educational for me. A couple of final points. I can't remember, I read several of these reports and some other background information. And, I guess one of the problems that was identified someplace, and maybe it was, I thought it was in GSA, they said that the quality of the people who are involved in evaluating some of these systems and all is not the level that they need, because some of these people have been, they're buying paper clips and office supplies and stuff. And I know this is kind of touchy. Isn't GSA the one that's doing the certification or responsible for it? Have you seen some of that, or is that anybody want to comment on it?
I mean, the individuals we have worked with, I don't agree with that. I think the individuals we've been working with in the FedRAMP
They get it?
are very
Okay.
good. And they have the three PAOs, and they've been very professional. And like Mr. Wells said, this is a really important process, and they haven't put anyone in there that I don't feel has been competent.
The other thing too, Jerry, is we're asking people to dismantle sort of the standard operating safe procedure, buy a couple more hard drives, hire a few more people, as opposed to dismantling a lot of what they've got. And then, of course, Mr. O'Keefe just said the politics of it. I've tried on FAA, I've tried some of the consolidation of the centers. And like one in Florida is like this, every card in the world is pulled out to keep some things that are unnecessary in today's IT world and computer and technology world, but that's very tough. So we end up being the problem. Well, again, I think we've gotten some good testimony. I was just fascinated hearing. I guess if Amazon could get a little bit more experience under their belt, maybe they could get certified. It's for a mom and pop startup. I understand the difficulty you're incurring, but we should look a little bit more at that if we could get yeah. And if 88%, you know, it's we could probably take it down a few more notches. We're not risking the national treasury or secrets. We could have a little bit more efficiency in this process. Well, again, I think it's most informative. I'm still disappointed we didn't have a couple of the key players here. We will convene another hearing, and we will talk to our leaders. If we have to bring them here voluntarily, we will. If we have to bring them involuntarily, we will. But we will have a follow-up hearing. I think it's very important.
Mr. Chairman, I also want to thank your staff. They've been very, very helpful and cooperative.
So they can.
We really appreciate it.
The beatings will not continue.
No more beatings.
The sequestration will be eliminated. So thank you so much for joining us today and providing us with your testimony. Mr. Conley, no further business. No further business before the Subcommittee on Government Operations. This hearing is adjourned.